I was 62 when I found out my wife was cheating on me. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. No screaming, no sudden confrontation. It was just a quiet. Like the world had stopped for a second, and I was the only one who noticed. We'd been married for 35 years. I thought I knew her better than I knew myself. Her name was Linda. She was my high school sweetheart, the girl I gave my jacket to on a cold autumn night. We had 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. But that night, everything changed. It started with a text message. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I wasn't the kind of man who checked his wife's phone. I trusted her completely. But something in me, something small and uneasy, told me to look. The message read, "I miss you already. Last night was incredible." I remember staring at those words until the letters blurred. My hands were shaking. I put the phone down like it was a weapon. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, smiling like nothing was wrong, I couldn't even look at her. She asked me if I was okay. I said I was just tired, but inside, my heart was cracking open. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the glow of the TV painting my face in silence. I replayed our entire marriage in my head, every laugh, every fight, every quiet breakfast. Trying to see where it all went wrong. The next morning, I acted normal. I kissed her on the cheek before she left for work, just like always. But as soon as the door closed, I broke down. I cried like I hadn't cried in decades. Not because she betrayed me, but because I realized how much I loved her. And how blind I'd been. For days, I didn't confront her. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, but the messages kept coming. Sometimes late at night, sometimes during dinner. I saw his name too. It was Frank, our neighbor, an old family friend. A man I'd shared beers with on Sundays while watching football. I felt sick. The betrayal came from 2 directions, the woman I loved and the friend I trusted. When I finally asked her about it, she froze. Her face turned pale, then red. She didn't even try to lie. She just said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." Those words cut deeper than any lie could. I asked her why. She said she felt lonely. That I'd been distant since retirement, that she needed to feel wanted again. I wanted to shout, to smash something, but all I did was nod. Because part of me understood, we both stopped trying years ago. We became comfortable, predictable, like 2 old chairs in a quiet room. But knowing that didn't make the pain any easier. For weeks, I walked around the house like a ghost. Our kids were grown and gone. The house felt like an echo of what it used to be. Every room reminded me of her laughter. Every photo felt like a lie. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my son or daughter. I was ashamed. Not of her, but of myself, for not seeing it coming. One evening, I went for a drive. No destination, no plan, just the road and the radio playing soft country songs. I ended up by the lake where we used to go fishing. The sun was setting, painting the water gold. That's when I realized something. My whole life, I'd built everything around us. Now, I didn't even know who I was. The thoughts scared me more than the loneliness, so I started to write. Just small things at first, memories, regrets, thoughts. Every night, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a pen. Writing became my way of breathing again. Linda moved out a month later. We didn't fight about it. She said she needed space, and for once, I agreed. After she left, the silence in the house felt heavier. But it was also peaceful. I could hear the birds outside again. I could taste my morning coffee without bitterness. I didn't know it then, but that silence was the start of something new. Something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I wasn't ready to call it hope yet, but it was close. Some nights, I still cried, but slowly, the tears became fewer. And the writing turned from pain to reflection. I started to remember who I used to be before life got so heavy. A dreamer, a man who loved the sound of rain and the smell of fresh-cut grass. A man who believed in love, and maybe, just maybe, that man wasn't gone yet. One morning, I decided to fix up the old porch. The boards were rotting, and the railings had started to lean. It felt good to work with my hands again, sawing, hammering, sanding. The rhythm calmed me. While I was out there, a voice called from across the street. It was Margaret, the widow who'd moved in 2 houses down last spring. She asked if I needed help holding the ladder. I laughed, said I'd been doing this kind of thing for 40 years, but she came over anyway. She was about my age, silver hair, kind eyes, and a smile that didn't try too hard. We talked for a while as I worked, about nothing special, the weather, the neighborhood, our favorite TV shows. But for the first time in months, I felt something warm inside me, a small flicker of connection. After she left, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in a romantic way, at least, not yet. Just grateful that someone saw me again. Days turned into weeks, and we kept running into each other. Sometimes she'd bring me cookies, sometimes I'd help her carry groceries. It was simple, unspoken companionship, no expectations, no pressure. Just two people quietly learning how to smile again. One evening, she invited me over for dinner. We sat on her back porch, eating chicken pot pie and watching fireflies. It felt so normal, so peaceful, that I almost forgot the ache inside me. When I got home, I looked around my quiet house and smiled for the first time in a long time. It wasn't the same life I had before, but maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe this was my chance to start over. And for the first time, that thought didn't scare me, it made me hopeful. A few weeks passed, and Margaret and I started talking more often. She had a garden full of roses, and every time I passed by, she'd wave at me with her gloves covered in dirt. There was something real about her. No pretending, no small talk for the sake of politeness. She listened when I spoke, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone in years. One afternoon, I mentioned Linda. I told her everything, the messages, the betrayal, the sleepless nights. She didn't interrupt or judge. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, and said, "That must have hurt more than words can say," and for the first time, I felt understood. That night, I went home feeling lighter, like a part of the burden I'd carried for months had finally lifted. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was healing. Margaret became a friend. We'd drink coffee on Sundays and talk about silly things. Our kids, our memories, the songs we grew up with. She had a laugh that made the air feel softer. One evening, she asked if I'd ever forgiven Linda. The question caught me off guard. I said I didn't know. Part of me still hated her, but another part just felt sorry. "Maybe forgiveness isn't for her," Margaret said. "Maybe it's for you." Those words stuck with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the empty street, thinking about what forgiveness really meant. It didn't mean forgetting. It meant freeing myself from the constant replay of pain. And maybe I was ready to do that. The next morning, I wrote Linda a letter. I didn't plan to send it. I just needed to say everything I'd been holding in. I told her I was angry. I told her she broke something that would never fully heal. But I also told her I hoped she found peace. Because I was finally learning to find mine. After writing that letter, I burned it in the backyard. The smoke rose into the sky, and I felt something deep inside me let go. It was the closest thing to peace I'd felt in a long time. That weekend, Margaret invited me to a local art fair. At first, I wanted to say no. I hadn't been anywhere crowded in months. But she smiled and said, "Come on, it'll do you good," so I went. The fair was small but lively. Music, laughter, food trucks, and children running around with balloons. I watched people living their lives and realized how long I'd been just surviving. Margaret bought us lemonade, and we sat on a bench under the shade. We talked about everything: life, love, second chances. She told me she'd lost her husband 5 years ago, and that for a long time, she didn't think she'd ever feel alive again. But then, she said, smiling softly, life surprised me. I looked at her and realized that maybe life was surprising me too. That night, when I got home, I didn't feel lonely. I felt grateful that pain had led me here. Grateful that I hadn't closed my heart completely. Over the next few months, Margaret and I grew closer. We didn't rush it. It was gentle, natural, like spring after a long winter. She'd come over for dinner, and we'd sit on the porch listening to old songs. Sometimes we danced, slow and awkward, laughing at our own clumsiness. It wasn't passion or fire. It was something better, peace. One day, Linda called me. It had been almost a year since we split. She said she was sorry, that Frank had left her. That she didn't know what she was thinking back then. Her voice trembled, and for a second, I felt that old ache again, but this time, it didn't consume me. I told her I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. She cried quietly and thanked me. After the call, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. Just a strange, calm acceptance. The past was the past. And I was finally living in the present. That evening, I told Margaret about the call. She smiled and said, "That's a big step." I nodded. It really was. Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It happens in quiet moments when you finally stop wishing for a different ending. Life started to feel new again. The days felt shorter, but somehow fuller. I started volunteering at the local community center, helping rebuild old houses for veterans. It gave me purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. Margaret would bring sandwiches for the crew sometimes. Everyone teased me, calling her my girlfriend. I'd laugh and say, "Not yet," but in my heart, I knew they were right. One night, I took her out to dinner at a small restaurant by the river. The place was quiet, the kind of spot where you could actually hear yourself think. After dessert, I reached across the table and took her hand. She smiled, that same warm, gentle smile I'd fallen in love with. "I don't know what this is," I said softly, "but I'm glad it's happening." She squeezed my hand and said, "Me too." And just like that, I realized, love doesn't always come once in a lifetime. Sometimes, it finds you when you think your story's over. But really, it's just a new chapter beginning. Months turned into a year. Margaret and I spent almost every day together. We took morning walks, cooked dinner side by side, and watched old movies until we fell asleep on the couch. It wasn't perfect. We argued sometimes, laughed at ourselves even more. But it felt real. My kids met her that Christmas. They were hesitant at first, protective of their mother, but eventually they saw what she meant to me. They saw how she made me smile again. Even Linda reached out to wish me well. I didn't hate her anymore. In some strange way, her betrayal had set me free. It pushed me to rebuild myself, to rediscover who I was beyond being someone's husband. Now, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a man who had been broken, but rebuilt stronger. Life, I realized, isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what you do with it once it finds you. And I chose to turn mine into something meaningful. I started writing again, not letters this time, but stories. About loss, about forgiveness, about second chances. I even got one published in the local paper. Margaret framed it and hung it in the hallway. She said it reminded her that healing is possible at any age. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch with her hand in mine, I think about the night I found that message on Linda's phone. Back then, it felt like the end of my world. Now, I see it differently. It was the beginning of a new one, a better one. Because sometimes life breaks you just enough to let the light in, and that's what it did for me. I'm not bitter anymore. I'm grateful. Grateful for love, even when it hurt. Grateful for pain, because it taught me what matters. And grateful for the chance to love again, quietly, honestly, in the twilight of my years. If you told me 2 years ago that I'd be happy again, I would have laughed. But here I am, 64, and finally at peace. I still miss parts of my old life sometimes. But not in a painful way, more like a chapter I've already read and learned from. And now, I'm writing new ones. Every sunrise feels like a small miracle. Every laugh with Margaret feels like a gift. So if you're listening to this and your heart's been broken, trust me, you can heal. You can start again. No matter how old you are, no matter how lost you feel. Because love doesn't end with heartbreak. Sometimes, that's where it truly begins, and I'm living proof of that. It's been 3 years since that day I found the message on her phone. 3 years since my old life ended and my new one began. Sometimes I still think about it, not with anger, but with curiosity. How something so painful could lead to something so beautiful. Life has a strange way of teaching us. It doesn't always whisper, sometimes it shouts, and back then, it shouted loud enough to break my heart open. But looking back now, I'm thankful for that noise. Because without it, I might have never woken up. I might have spent the rest of my life asleep in a comfortable lie, Now, I live awake. I notice the small things, the warmth of morning coffee, the chirp of birds at dawn, the way Margaret hums when she waters her flowers. Those moments feel like treasures. Moments I used to rush past, thinking they didn't matter, but they do. They're the whole point. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch, watching the rain fall. Margaret was inside baking a pie, the smell of cinnamon filling the air. And it hit me. This was happiness, not the loud, movie kind. The quiet, steady kind that wraps around your heart like a blanket. I smiled to myself, thinking about how far I'd come. The man who once thought his world was over had built a new one. Not perfect, but his, and that was enough. Sometimes my daughter calls to ask how I'm doing. She says I sound different, lighter, younger somehow. I tell her it's because I finally stopped carrying things that weren't mine to carry. Forgiveness does that. It clears space inside you for peace to move in. Linda and I still talk every now and then. We've both moved on. She's seeing someone new, and I truly hope she's happy. I think we both learned the same lesson. Love isn't possession, it's presence. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go. I didn't understand that before, but now I do. Margaret and I never married. We didn't feel the need to. We just live our days side by side, grateful for the time we have. She makes tea in the morning, I make her laugh before bed. It's simple, and that's what makes it perfect. People often think happiness is something you chase. But at my age, I've learned it's something you notice. You stop running, and suddenly, there it is, right beside you, quietly waiting. Sometimes I read the letters I wrote during those dark months after Linda left. They're painful, raw, full of anger and confusion. But I don't throw them away. They remind me of who I was and how far I've come. Pain is part of the story. Without it, joy wouldn't mean as much. Without endings, we'd never appreciate beginnings. Last week, Margaret and I took a road trip along the coast. The ocean stretched endlessly beside us, blue and calm. We stopped at a small diner near the water. As we ate, she looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about what could have been?" I smiled. "Sometimes," I said. "But then I think about what is, and I realize it's even better." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That simple touch said everything. No grand gestures, no dramatic words, just quiet love between two people who deep in through enough to know what really matters. That night, as we watched the sunset together, I thought about my journey. From betrayal to peace, from heartbreak to love. From being lost to finally being found. And I realized, this wasn't just my story. It was the story of anyone who's ever had to rebuild their life from pieces. Anyone who's ever looked at their reflection and wondered if they'd ever smile again. To those people, I say, yes, you will. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But one morning, you'll wake up and the weight will feel a little lighter, the air will taste a little sweeter, and you'll know you survived, and that's where healing begins. Margaret says I have a poet's heart. Maybe she's right. But I think I just have an old man's heart that has finally learned how to be soft again, and maybe that's enough. These days, I spend my mornings writing, my afternoons walking, and my evenings watching the sunset with her. We don't talk much sometimes, we don't need to. The silence between us feels full, not empty. It's filled with everything we've learned, everything we've forgiven, and everything we've become. I used to think my life ended when Linda cheated on me. Now, I see it as the day I started over. The day I stopped existing for someone else and started living for myself. The day I learned that broken hearts don't stay broken forever, they just grow back differently, stronger, wiser, kinder, and when they love again, they love with depth. With truth, with grace. That's the kind of love I have now. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that warms, the kind that stays. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, it would be this. Don't fear endings. They're just disguised beginnings, because everything I lost made room for everything I have now. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. So if you're listening, and your heart is heavy, hold on. The storm will pass, the pain will soften, and when it does, you'll see what I see now. That even after betrayal, after heartbreak, after everything falls apart, life still has beauty waiting for you. You just have to open your eyes, and when you do, you'll find it was there all along. Sometimes, I walk down to the lake alone. It's the same lake where I once sat, broken and lost, wondering what the point of it all was. Now, it's my favorite place. The water still ripples, the birds still sing, and I still sit on the same bench. Only this time, I'm not searching for answers, I'm simply thankful. For the journey, for the lessons, for the love I found along the way. Margaret joins me sometimes, we hold hands and watch the reflections dance on the water. And every time, I think, this is what peace feels like, not perfection, just peace. The kind you earn after a long road of learning and letting go. When the wind moves through the trees, I hear echoes of my past, but they don't hurt anymore. They remind me that I lived, that I loved, that I grew. And maybe that's the point of it all, to live fully, to love deeply, and to learn when it's time to start again. I may be older now, slower than I used to be. But my heart feels young again. Because love, when it's real, doesn't age, it just changes shape. And in the quiet moments, when I look at Margaret's smile, I know one thing for sure. I wouldn't change a single thing that brought me here, not even the heartbreak. Because it all led me to this, to peace, to love, to the best years of my life. And maybe that's the secret we only learn when we've lived long enough to lose. That every ending hides a beginning, every wound hides wisdom. And every broken heart has the power to love again. So if you ever find yourself sitting alone, thinking it's over, remember my story. It's not over, you're just on your way to something better. And one day, you'll look back, smile, and say, thank God it happened, because it made you who you were meant to be. That's what happened to me. And for that, I'm endlessly grateful. This is my story. A story of betrayal, forgiveness, and love reborn. But more than that, it's a story about life. And how beautiful it can still be, even after it breaks your heart. The sun sets behind the lake, painting the sky in gold and red. Margaret leans her head on my shoulder. I close my eyes and whisper to myself, this is what peace feels like, and for the first time in my life, I truly mean it.